Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast and live stream. I'm Jessie, Lizak, fractional CMO at BDEX, along with David Finkelstein, BDEX's founder and CEO. What's new this week, David? I can't believe it's the end of August already.
I know, it's absolutely crazy. It's just been really busy summer. I can't believe, like, for some people, I guess summer is over. I don't know, here in Florida, it's still summer. So we have a long summer, but yeah, time has flown, and our next guest, excited to talk to him because we get to talk about identity, which is, the data that I like talking about the most, but also, like, I talked to Dirk back in March before, when we first talked about having him on the show, and I can't believe the time has flown that he's finally on the show. So I'll let you introduce him, but excited to have this conversation with him.
Yes, this is going to be a great conversation. And today on Deconstructing Data, we're excited to welcome Dirk Rohweder. He's an entrepreneur and marketing technology expert with a CIO background and more than 35 years of experience building data and marketing infrastructure. Dirk, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jessie and David.
Yeah, absolutely. Dirk, excited to have this conversation and talk about, we're going to talk about different types of identity graphs, public and private. But before we dive into that, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners, give them a chance to get to know you a little bit, of your background and what led you to the work that you're doing today, and tell us a little bit about the work you and Tivaro are doing today.
Okay, yeah, happy to give you a short introduction of my professional background. I've always worked on one question: how can information technology and the potential of information technology help organizations for their own benefit and the benefit of their customers? And I have done that in various roles. I started out classical in consulting, then I was CIO of a Munich brewery group, the Paulaner Group, and then I went as a CIO to T-Mobile in the UK and in Germany, and various IT group functions. And finally, 10 years ago, I co-founded Tivaro together with Robert Bergman. And since then, I'm the CEO of that company. And what we do is provide infrastructure for marketing identity and data activation. And with that, we typically try to answer two questions. So the first one is, who is the person in front of a digital device? Because obviously it's difficult to do marketing if you don't know with whom you're talking. So we try to provide an answer to that. The second question, very important in marketing, is to say, what am I actually allowed to do? So what type of consent or legitimate interest do I have in order to do marketing with that person? And then thirdly is, what information is necessary kind of to perform the next best action or just the next action in the channel. And we in Tivaro kind of answer those three questions by providing identity, permissions, and data to all marketing and ad tech system that needs that. And typically we do that all in real time, because if the person is in front of a device, then the answer needs to be typically in milliseconds, and the answer needs to be quite scalable, especially if you have kind of large websites or apps with a lot of traffic.
Absolutely. I love the journey from brewery to identity. That's a new one.
It's German identity, yeah, the German beer.
So let's jump into the first topic, because this is interesting. You and I both work in the identity space, but in different areas. And so talk to us about public versus private identity graphs and how they work.
So obviously, I'm an expert in private identity graphs, and obviously you are the expert on public identity graphs, I guess. So what's the difference? So I think public identity graphs are well known under the term identity graph because basically the data, the identities, and often kind of data with it is collected for a whole country or region and provided as a service to other companies. Mm-hmm. Now, a private ID graph basically is owned by the company that operates it for its own purposes. So it's kind of the equivalent to first-party data, so to say. So these companies build their own ID graph, and it's proprietary to them. And very often you will see that this is not explicitly done kind of with an own system like ours. But it's kind of a bit implicit. It's kind of identities in CRM system, identities, and maybe even some mappings in data warehouses or in customer data platforms. Now the question: what is actually an identity graph, and what should be the capabilities and functionality of that? Now the core function is, as I said in the beginning, is to answer the question: who is the person in front of the device? And typically you don't know that because it's an anonymous kind of person. You might have a cookie identifier, but you don't know who that person is. And an identity graph basically maps kind of these devices and the device identifiers to a person and personal identifiers. And then if you make that connection, then obviously you can use all the data you know about a person, be it a customer with all the customer data, be it the lead, what you have kind of collected about that customer. Now, the question is then actually, how do you build such a graph? Because obviously, how should you know who that person is? And obviously can talk more about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things when you and I first met, that I found that you guys did a good job of solving. So when you think about what you said about a company having a CRM and then maybe having a CDP or having different platforms to communicate with people, whether they have a website or an app or whatever, but being able to connect all of those touch points so that you're talking to the same person. Is really important. And I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of companies are often trying to deal with, especially these, the larger the company is, the more different touch points they have between email and a mobile ID, the website, and being able to sort of connect all those different touch points and know that you're talking to the same person. Talk to us about how, the challenges that you see when you are talking to companies about how to go about doing this and how you guys overcome those challenges for them.
Yeah, I mean, the typical challenge is that in many companies, you don't have 100% login. Yeah, obviously there are some companies which force customers or prospects to log in all the time, so they know who that is, but that is not the typical model. So typically what we see is that people say, maybe I have a login of 5-10% kind of in my website. On the app, typically it's much higher. But I don't know the other 85% and kind of who they are. I only know when they kind of when they log in, and obviously that's leaving a lot of things on the table. First, obviously you can't address kind of those customers if they are not logged in, and secondly, you can collect the signals, but the signals will be anonymous, so you can't kind of add them kind of to a profile to know more. So that's typically the challenge kind of that we see. Now the question is, what can you do about it? So typically we build the identity graph deterministically, so we need to have what we call identification events, and it starts very simple. You can use that login, and if you anchor that login on the device with a persistent first-party cookie, unless that cookie is deleted, the identification will stay. So once you have logged in once, and then as long as the cookie isn't deleted, the relationship kind of stays. We'll keep that in a central database, and obviously that already can increase the identification of repeat visitors. Now there are other methods, especially for prospecting. We all know there is the download kind of an article, a book, or just a simple newsletter subscription. There again, you can connect the identifier you collect with the device, and again, as long as that anchoring is not deleted, that will help you kind of identify more people. Then if you some companies that have multiple domains, so they want to understand customer journeys across those domains, so they might want a solution that enables kind of what we call cross-domain identification. And that is possible as well. So if you identify a person or a user on one domain, you will identify them if they go to the other on the other domain. So that's cross-domain identification. The fourth one is, I mean, you mentioned email, very typical click identification. You click on email, obviously you know it comes from an email, so you know the person you've sent the email to, and you can use the click kind of to extend that identification to the device. And that can be quite powerful because sometimes the login happens on different devices than, for example, the click. And last but not least, which is kind of a bit our speciality, is what we call network identification, which telecommunication providers can use, which is they have the public IP address and they can identify a person based on the public IP address. And in Europe, at least, this service, not to identify a person, but to recognize a person kind of again, is also available through the major European network providers in the major European countries. And yeah, we have provided them with the technology to do that. So by combining kind of all these technologies, you can get a much higher proportion of identified users. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned, but is obviously is quite important for that under privacy law, that needs consent. Yeah, so typically this is based on cookie consent and only works if the user has consented to that. And typically the way to tell the user that that makes sense is that the user gets personalized offers, which actually many people want, and it is an incentive.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the consent, and you're right. I mean, the what we find is that the consensus is that most people do consent to it because it creates a convenience for them, right? And having a brand that they want to interact with, being able to actually recognize them, personalize things to them, and essentially makes the user experience better. We find most time people
and as you said, I mean, it's sometimes a question of trust to the brand. Yeah, that's why these brands kind of we work with typically takes the privacy very, very seriously and think a lot about it, just because the trust of the consumer is kind of a core asset to them.
Yeah, that's a big point, and we've talked about that on the show before. Like, if a consumer trusts the brand that they're working with, then they're most likely going to consent to allow that brand. So it's about earning trust with the consumer is really, really important as well.
Yeah, and one thing kind of what we see kind of also with identity graphs is kind of maintenance is quite important. Yeah, because sometimes you have very simple solutions that do not take kind of the relationship between devices and persons kind of properly into account, and kind of that. I mean, just imagine the following thing: you have different logins in a device. What do you do? You know, what's your strategy of dealing with it? And some will say, okay, we'll merge all of these profiles together, and that can end up in a mess. Sometimes it can be genuine. I mean, once we had a consumer, a client where we detected actually we had in 4 or 5% we had all these multiple accounts on the same device, and that was because there were incentives combined with opening accounts. And then people kind of open new accounts with new emails. And obviously with such a device, you can detect kind of how big this problem actually is.
Yeah, and that's an important point too. I think I always talk to people about how an identity graph is sort of like a living being, because it's constantly changing. It's not like you can.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. You need to keep it up to date all the time. Also, devices, sometimes they show up, they're never active again. So it's something constantly kind of in movement, and you need to have housekeeping, maintenance rules that keep the consistency automatically, because if you have millions of customers, there cannot be manual intervention kind of to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a misconception that an identity graph
it needs to run totally automatic.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. There's this misconception that an identity graph is something you can build and then just use it, and then, maybe update it, every once in a while or monthly or something like that. But IPs change, cookies come and go, people change devices, like everything changes constantly. And so if you're not constantly updating it and treating it as something that is real time and live, then it becomes out of date, with every day that passes.
It goes so quickly. I agree. I agree with that. That's why every single identification event in real time updates the graph, and the graph is changed kind of as a result of that.
Yeah,
and it's quite I mean, some customers are also quite surprised when they see the deduplication factors. Yeah, so imagine you have identified a customer, and then kind of we compare it is okay, how many profiles would you have created if you wouldn't have had that relationship? And it obviously differs by client, but it is for identified customers as high as 80-90% deduplication. So typically you can end up, you think you have 10 new customers, but actually only 1 or 2 of them are really new.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. Well, this is a great place to sort of transition into our next topic, which is still very much related to identity resolution. Our next topic is how identity resolution makes anonymous customer intent actionable. And I'm really curious, Dirk, to hear your take on this. So, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, what we are trying to do, what I said is, obviously we will do the identification, right, to make it to make it actionable. So in the end, what was anonymous, because it was like maybe not logged in, it was kind of an anonymous visitor, kind of through the identity graph. This becomes kind of or can be associated to a known customer. Now the question is, how can you make it actionable? And we see the actions actually in 4 different categories. The simplest thing is, now you have more signals, and you can make those signals, which kind of would have been anonymous, now it's kind of on a person level. So you can use that information as kind of pre-login signals for your models. Yeah, so you can make better churn models, better propensity models, because they have a more complete picture kind of what you have done. So that's the first thing. The second thing is obviously this can help building audiences or suppression audiences. Just give you a very simple example is if you if somebody looks at your website and looks at new products, you might think, oh yeah, it's a prospect, it's unidentified, so you would retarget all of them. But in the end, if you find out through identity resolution, it's actually a customer that already has that product, you can suppress that. You can not spend that money on kind of acquiring a customer you already have. And if you have a huge base like telecommunication, banking, insurance have, that can be quite substantial. So that's the second way. It just helps you kind of building audiences or suppressing audiences. The third one is kind of the case I like most. which is kind of a trigger use case. So obviously the classical example is kind of in any kind of environment that sells something, shopping cart abandonment. Yeah, that seems a no-brainer. Everyone is doing it. Reality is very, very often you don't know who is the person that has done it. In many cases, 2/3. It depends a little bit on your flow. 2/3 of the abandonments, kind of in our customers, are before the user gives you the email, because he already fills the shopping cart, and they don't require kind of a login kind of to do that. And the majority is abandoned there. And typically, you can't kind of follow up on those. So typically you can say, okay, I have this signal shopping cart abandonment. Now you can give that signal kind of to an email or another messaging system, and basically then that system can use that information. So that's an effective trigger. There are other things. Just imagine you're going abroad somewhere where you don't have a roaming pass. It's detected. You'll get the offer. So I mean, there are so many examples, from simple to sophisticated, for that. And then the final one is kind of action in the session. Yeah. So just imagine, again, a very simple case. It's an insurance. They have typically next best offers. You are getting on the website. If you're not logged in, they don't know who you are. They can't give you that next best offer. If you do the identification and at the same time fetch the offer on first page load, you can do kind of the personalization. Obviously, you can make that much more sophisticated again, but it just shows you some use cases where you can use identity resolution to make this actionable.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the shopping cart abandoned one is a really interesting one that, we work with a couple of clients in this space, and, the idea that you can identify an anonymous visitor that has abandoned a shopping cart is one thing, but understanding whether they are an existing customer or a new customer enables you to communicate very differently with that customer. And so that's
exactly.
yeah,
and that's I think where you can make the the simple thing is you just give a reminder, but think, today is you can analyze with an LLM in the shopping cart. You can say what's the friction, then you can use that kind of to inform messaging. So it's like I always say endless possibility. Obviously they need to make sense, from a business case perspective. But yeah, and companies are starting now to make more sophisticated use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually
some time before.
Yeah, that's actually one that I never even thought about before. A client came to us and they proposed that they wanted to do that, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. That's a great new use case that I hadn't thought about before, and it was very specific to the point that they just wanted to see, are these users that they already knew, and because they wanted to treat them very differently, obviously, than a new customer. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. That's what I love about this space. We always learn something new from our customers.
Absolutely.
Yes. Wow, there's really a lot there. I mean, the real opportunity seems like it isn't just like identifying the abandoned cart. It's really understanding the relationship kind of behind it. So it's really a little more complex than that. Any more?
Yeah, and the banking
end,
example that you gave, Dirk, was really interesting too, because when you think about a banking customer where they, have millions of customers, and for them to understand whether this is a new customer coming to their website to learn about them, or is it an existing customer, is another really interesting way for them to use that to improve their targeting.
No, that's why I'm also sometimes saying it. Sometimes these are quite basic. They seem like basic use cases.
Yeah.
But if you don't know, you can't make that differentiation.
And it can really
that
move
alone
the needle.
Exactly. That's what we're seeing, and that's kind of also where then the value is kind of created. Yeah, because it's always this. You have the question. Okay, I have an identity and activation infrastructure, but what is actually the commercial value kind of that creates. That's often the question. And kind of with these examples and the use cases, it's pretty good also to calculate in the end what the uplift is potentially kind of from this.
We did get a question. I would love to hear you answer David's question. David, what is the banking customer use case for BDEX data and 2-segment?
Yeah, I saw that flash by and I was like, that's interesting. I never thought about that. It's a really good question, but I think it's, similar in the e-commerce space where just being able to use the data that we have at 2-segment to understand the customer better and be able to do that personality analysis as well, so you know how to communicate with them better. And so I think that really applies with banks too. Understanding not just, is this a new customer, is this an existing customer, and how do I want to communicate with them, but how should I communicate with them? This is something that we're really starting to dig into more at 2-segment, and the idea of being able to communicate to customers differently based on that personality analysis that we're able to do with the deep data insights from 2-segment. Communicating with somebody that is, more of an artistic person versus a more, detail-oriented person. Like, these are two very different types of people, and they're going to read an email or an ad or a video, and they're going to, absorb that content very differently. And so understanding who you're talking to, not just from a data perspective, but also from a, personality perspective is really interesting. And so I'm glad David brought that up, because that's an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about for 2-segment as well.
Were you going to say something, Dirk? It cut out a little bit.
Yeah. No, I was saying, I think that's exactly what people need to think about. What is relevant for this use case? Yeah. What is the data relevant kind of to really make the reply different? As you said, it might be, in your example, the approach towards the customer, depending on the personality, is quite different. So then if you can act on it, then it makes sense kind of to include that into the context. Yeah? So to give that email platform then to say, okay, yeah, here's the abandonment, that's the customer, here's the personality. Now create the right messaging for that, or selected or generated, whatever the technology is that is used.
Yeah.
Well, it's 4:44. I'm sure we could continue talking about this topic too, but let's get into topic 3, which is how intent-driven marketing uses behavioral signals earlier. Could you kick us off here, Dirk?
Of course, yeah. So the way I look at it, I mean, typically you have a customer journey which has kind of different phases. Now the customer can go back in phases, back and forth, but typically there are different behaviors in different phases. So when you look at it, typically you start with orientation. You'll see, okay, do I have a problem? You start to learn more about it. Then obviously you're looking at content that is not geared towards sales, but understanding problems, potential solutions. At some point, you might then say, okay, that's something interesting from you. Now I go in the evaluation phase. I evaluate, what can I do? Then maybe you're saying, oh, that looks really interesting. Now I'm going kind of into the preparation phase, kind of to make a decision. I'm looking at concrete offers and stuff like that. And then I finally do kind of the execution of my decision. And typically what you can say is that in CRM system, in the typical transactional systems, you see the decisions when they are done, for sure, at the end. And then sometimes, like in subscription business, then you say, for example, somebody has churned, I see it, and then I try to make you kind of an offer so that you cancel that. Now, the later you act as a company kind of in these phases, typically I would say the less leverage you have and the more expensive it gets. And kind of the whole economics of kind of intent-driven marketing is to understand intent as early as possible in early phases, And then obviously, if you make the right choices, you can influence kind of the customer kind of in a much better way that is more satisfied, it's less costly. And the challenge with that's where it goes back to identification, is that typically these early phases don't require login, so they go unnoticed. And therefore, many companies don't see the signals, or they see it only in aggregates in their analytics. And then they try to remediate, or they always wonder why they have not converted, why the customer has churned or not reordered again. And they missed all the points kind of in the journey where they could have interacted with the customer to come kind of to a different outcome. So that's really the core, and also kind of the economic justification why that makes sense for all companies, maybe that have a bit more complex products where people don't kind of instantly buy, but actually want have a more complex process, and that can be like in telecommunications. Definitely it's in business to business, yeah, where you have a lot of that, and where you sometimes even need to aggregate it on different levels. So this can happen on the personal level, can actually happen on a household level, can happen on an organizational level, which comes then with additional requirements for identity resolution.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what would you say, Dirk, for the people that want to sort of get started in, intent-driven marketing? Like, what would you say is like the practical first step for someone to get started? Because, you covered a lot. And I think that, we always talk about sort of being goal-oriented and thinking about, okay, what's your initial goal? And then think about your sort of secondary and final goals. But so what would you say like is a really good place for someone to start?
Yeah, I mean, you could start kind of where's your biggest challenge. Yeah. So when you look at these intent signals, I always said, like, that's the economic outcome. So what could be the economic outcome, which kind of can guide you towards where to start? So one can be, okay, do you have a problem of churn, or people only buy, if you're not a subscription business, buy only once, they don't do repeat buys? Is that your biggest problems? Or is your problem you don't getting your cross and upsell, or you have a lot of opportunities there but you don't seem to get it? Or is it simply your media spend is very inefficient, and actually you think you should get a lot more out of your media budget? Or thirdly, do you have a support problem? Yeah, that basically you can see kind of a lot of problem coming, which you could have alleviated, but they all kind of are detected too late kind of in the process, and therefore it's very expensive. So I would start is kind of what's kind of really for your company out of those things economically kind of the most important ones for you to solve. And then you can say, okay, what is the process? And then you can look at, do I have then you can say, do I have some early kind of intent signals, which might be, yeah, you can start with more obvious ones before you go kind of to more subtle ones. If you are in telecommunications, for example, kind of an availability check is kind of a great, it's a great mechanism kind of to understand kind of what people want. So you need to look in your business, do you have kind of some of those intent signals, and that's what you want to achieve, and then you can start a use case around that.
Yeah, that's great advice. And then that's what we're always trying to do, is trying to help people not only understand the concepts that we're talking about, but understand how they can get started without, being overwhelmed. And so I appreciate that feedback. I think that it helps people understand like how to, figure out what's that one pain point that they want to tackle and take it one step at a time.
Yeah, and then obviously the good thing is once you've kind of started with the first one, because you've put in kind of some infrastructure of identification, suddenly the next one will be even a little bit less difficult. And we always say it's very important that you don't follow a principle where I said, oh, I have to get all my data right, or I have all my identification. You will never get to that point. Yeah. So it obviously needs to be good enough, but your effort should be use case driven rather than layer driven, to say. I mean, I'm coming from IT in my old time, so we say, I really like everything nice and clean, and unfortunately that never happens.
Exactly.
Very rarely.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. Well, we've got someone in the comments asking more about BDEX and what both of the companies do. So maybe we should get into that and let both of you share a line or two about your companies before we move into tech stack, which is our final topic that we do on every episode. We definitely want to know what tools you use in your tech stack, Dirk. But David, in one line or less, you want to share about BDEX, and Dirk, you want to share about your company as well?
Oh, yeah. Okay. On the spot. Yeah. So obviously BDEX is a proprietary identity graph technology for helping ad tech, martech companies and brands understand who their consumers are and how to reach them across all their touch points.
Yeah, and we at Tivaro, we provide basically 3 products. One is kind of what we call the marketing identity hub. That's resolving identities and make that identities known kind of in your stack. So you can work, this can fuel, for example, your customer data systems and other systems that just want identity. We can also, what we call consent boost, we can also give kind of permissions and stuff on top of it, or we can do it all the way to say you also get the data in real time, which is kind of our data activation hub. So we provide that real time infrastructures to companies that want to interact with their consumers typically in a personalized way, and that can range from large companies in telecommunication to, actually, we've seen quite a demand in business to business. So we've gone into smaller segments that can take even more value out of individual interactions as well.
Nice. Well, yes. Thank you so much for both of you for sharing. They say they're going to subscribe to your channels. So this has been a great conversation, but we want to know, Dirk, what are some of your favorite tools in your tech stack?
Yeah, I mean, for that, given where I come from, I will tell you. Obviously, I'm interested in technology, but I'm even more interested in kind of the interplay of how technology can be used kind of by people and organizations, and they need to adapt kind of to make the most out of it. And having said that, obviously, at the moment, it's an incredible time to work in the industry with LLMs and artificial intelligence, because that will change, or already started to change, the way we work as individuals, but also in Tivaro as a company. And that's for me the most fascinating topic. And at the moment, obviously, we are experimenting with the classical different models. We work with Amazon kind of Bedrock as an intermediate layer, kind of to integrate LLMs and that into our technology stack, and changing that. Both kind of our internal processes, so how do we get from idea to product, as well as making our data available kind of our customer elements, and then also having some first things where we integrate that for functionalities into our stack. So that's I guess for me the biggest thing at the moment, which I find quite fascinating. And I would say the reality is we are at the starting point. The capabilities change every 2 or 3 months fundamentally, at least what I think what we can do. So it's still quite an explorative phase.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. And before we go, Dirk, would you like to let the listeners know a little bit more about where they might be able to reach you after the show?
Of course, you can connect to me on LinkedIn, Dirk Rohweder at Tivaro, or you can simply write me an email. It's my first name, Dirk, at tivaro.com.
Awesome, Dirk. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I always love talking identity. So I appreciate you coming on the show and having this conversation with us. It's been great, and I hope you enjoyed it. I know our viewers and listeners got a lot of great information from this conversation. So thank you.
No, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk with you about this fascinating topic.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, this is a great conversation on identity resolution. So thank you both. And thank you, audience. We hope to see you back next week, same time, same place. And Dirk, we'll see you backstage. Everyone else, see you next.
So audience members, we want to invite you to get powered by BDEX. Build authentic connections with your audience and drive unprecedented engagement. So just imagine harnessing the power of AI to craft your audiences that truly resonate with your brand, ensuring that your marketing is hitting the mark every time. We want to bring you closer to those marketing goals, and we're eager to guide you. So just visit bdex.com. You can click on the Talk to an Expert button and get powered by BDEX.
Deconstructing Data is the show that makes data make sense. Every Thursday, David Finkelstein and myself, Jessie Lizak, sit down with industry experts to unpack how data really drives marketing. We do this in plain language anyone can understand. If you want real insights, real conversations, and zero jargon, tune into Deconstructing Data live on LinkedIn every Thursday at 4:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Yo, yo.